Ready for some good old-fashioned Catholic guilt? Well then watch another video, because this will have none of that. Well, we'll have some of it, but not a lot. Maybe a little. So this week at Life Teen, we continued our semester on morality, and we talked about the reality and effects of sin. Rachel Butler delivered our proclaim and delivered a little bit of vocabulary about sin. We talked about sins of commission, sins of omission. We talked about the different types of sin, of mortal sin and venial sin. And for those of you who may not know, there are 3 conditions to be met for a sin to be mortal. 1, the sin must be a grave matter, and we find grave matters in the 10 Commandments. 2, you must have full knowledge that the sin you are about to commit is in fact grave matter and has the potential of cutting you off from the grace of God. And 3, you must give full consent of your will to do this anyway. We even talked a little bit about this thing called concupiscence, which is the disposition in man to tend towards sin and to be tempted. Rachel talked about our moral life and how we are called to live lives of freedom, and she drew out this teaching in a number of different analogies. The first analogy was to Adam and Eve in the garden. You see, when Adam and Eve sinned, they ran away and hid themselves from God. In our own lives, especially when we are younger children, we can see that the same thing exists for us today. When we do something wrong, like say locking your 7-year-old brother out of the house so he has to bang on a single pane window on the door to get in, and then he bangs so hard that he puts his fist through the window and then cuts his arm up and has to run to the neighbors screaming and crying because he cut himself open, we tend to run and hide out of fear or reprisal for the wrong we have done. And by the way, that example may or may not have been from my own life. Sorry, Mike. But Rachel gave us another analogy to talk about our relationship with God and how sin damages our relationship with God. Now we have to imagine that we're standing side by side to God and that we're actually like holding His hand. Now that's when we're in communion with Him and have the grace and His life within us. Venial sin would be when we're still holding God's hands looking at Him, but we tend to look away and then we look back. Now, the issue is, the more we commit venial sin, the greater tendency we will have to look away from God for longer periods of time. And the more venial sin accumulates in our lives, the more we may have the tendency to say, let go of one of God's hands. And then the more this venial sin continues to accumulate, we may start turning away from God a little bit, and we might just be holding on to His finger at this point. But we'll still look back towards God because we still have that relationship, but it's at the bare minimum now. You know, we're going to Mass once a week, but we're still living our own lives outside of that. And the more we let this venial sin accumulate, the more disposed we will be to turn away from God completely if a mortal sin happens to blow by. So venial sin is still sin. It's still an evil. And the more it can accumulate, the more it can dispose us to doing what is wrong. Mortal sin, on the other hand, would be a sin of grave matter that would completely cut you off from that relationship with God. It's one of those sins where you'd be standing with God hand in hand, and then a mortal sin would mean you'd let God's hands go and you turn away from God completely and start walking the other direction. Thank God for confession, right? And the reason we talked about sin when we're doing a semester on morality is because sin matters, and it is a reality in our daily lives. We are created free and to do good. The more we sin, the less free we become. So we have to be aware of sin in our own lives, seek to amend our lives, and continue to move forward in our relationship with God. Thanks for watching, and for more information about this stuff, check the doobly-doo below for annotations on the official church teaching. We hope to see you this Sunday as we continue our semester on morality by talking about the 3rd commandment.